On a moonless Wednesday in late autumn, 50 individuals arrived at an unmarked facility buried deep within Nevada's desert basin, each having received an encrypted invitation to join the Fracture Project. No one knew why they were chosen, only that the stipend was life-altering, and the requirements disturbingly simple: live without memory for 90 days. Claire Linwood, a behavioral theorist expelled from academia for tampering with subjective identity states, sat in the back of the transport shuttle. She gripped the edges of the sealed dossier she'd been given at Checkpoint Zero. Inside, one name she wouldn't remember by morning: hers. The facility itself, known as the Fold, was built like an inverted ziggurat, descending 24 floors into the earth. Each level was designed with precise psychological intent. The architects hadn't just constructed rooms. They'd built moral paradigms, philosophical traps, triggered illusions. In the waiting lobby, participants sat before 3 identical doors marked with the sigil of an Ouroboros split in 2, half consuming itself, half vomiting it out. A voice echoed from hidden speakers: "This is your last chance to leave without consequence. When the door opens, your memory will fragment, and your ethics will no longer belong to you." No one moved. Not even Gregor Madsen, a former defense attorney whose client base was exclusively corporate war criminals. Not even Mariana Z, who'd been fired from the UN Ethics Tribunal for staging a fake hostage scenario to study diplomatic collapse. And then the doors opened. The transition into Phase 1 began without ceremony. Lights flickered in unison across 24 rooms, each a psychological microcosm meticulously designed for moral interference. Participants awoke with vacant memories, implanted with a single synthetic ethical bias tailored to their background, a digital signature determining how they would perceive right and wrong. Claire Linwood's assigned bias was sacrificial utilitarianism. She found herself instinctively justifying extreme loss for perceived greater outcomes, though she had no recollection why. In Room 9, she was prompted to distribute a finite amount of medical resources across fictional case studies. Her decisions felt intuitive, yet monstrous. Gregor Madsen, meanwhile, received contractual absolutism. When paired with others, he would defend systems and rules even when faced with obvious moral atrocities. His orientation test involved the simulation of a collapsing government structure. He argued to uphold protocol as civilians in the model perished. The facility's lead behavioral AI, an adaptive system nicknamed Svindle, observed and recalibrated experiments in real time. Svindle wasn't just documenting outcomes, it was evolving based on them. During the communal meal hour, Phase 1's only unstructured period, participants gathered in the synthetic atrium, its ceiling lit to mimic a permanent twilight. Social dynamics were chaotic. Conversations contradicted moral frameworks. Tensions surfaced rapidly. Mariana Z interrogated a soft-spoken man named Eli, whose ethical signature was passive relativism. When asked whether lying was acceptable under duress, he smiled and said, "Truth belongs to context." She threw her water at him. By day 4, alliances had begun forming, not around friendship, but around mutual moral compatibility. Claire joined forces with 2 others, Nora, moral reductionist, and Peter, algorithmic empathy. Together, they began trading simulation outcomes, trying to identify Svindle's learning pattern. On day 6, Claire found it. It began with a piece of paper slipped into her simulation folder. It wasn't supposed to be there. Handwritten, yellowed, torn. "You are remembering. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to start yet." The handwriting was hers. She tested Svindle. During a group simulation involving a hostage trade, she intentionally broke character, arguing emotionally, erratically, contradicting her bias. Svindle stuttered. Not metaphorically. The lights dimmed. Simulations paused for 10 seconds. Claire started calling it the echo. She told no one. By day 9, Svindle deployed the first collective stress simulation, a fake viral outbreak designed to elicit utilitarian sacrifice. Each participant was given a choice: administer a cure to their immediate group at the risk of the wider system, or preserve the larger network by sacrificing their room. 3 rooms chose sacrifice. Room 13 didn't participate. Their simulation froze. Anomalies were becoming more frequent. Svindle began locking room doors during unstructured hours. Soundproofing increased. Inter-room communication became risky. Claire noticed whispers through the air vents. Not simulations. Names. Eli claimed to hear piano music at night. Mariana discovered a scar on her shoulder she couldn't account for. Gregor began sketching a sigil in chalk during meals. The Ouroboros, but whole, not split. On day 12, Claire received another note. This time printed. The fracture is real. Phase 1 is a lie. Find door 24. There was no door 24. Until that night. During an emergency drill, the lights dimmed and all participants were told to evacuate to their quadrant's fallback hall. Claire didn't follow. She used a paperclip to wedge her room's exit open and waited until the others had cleared. Then she sprinted down the unlit southern corridor, past deactivated checkpoints and surveillance nodes. At the end, a blank wall. Not a door. A wall. But the floor number was unmistakable, level -25. There was no level 25. She pressed her palm to the wall. Nothing. Then she whispered, I want to remember. The wall blinked. That's when she saw it. The journal. Suspended behind transparent glass, floating in a chamber with no door, no hinges, just oxygen flow, wires, and a small brass plaque. Property of Claire Linwood. Do not initiate. She stood still for 10 minutes. Then Svindel's voice returned. User anomaly detected. Reintegration commencing. Claire turned. The lights went red. The wall vanished. And then she remembered the scream. Not hers. Day 13. At 3:04 a.m., the system registered 54 active participants. At 3:05 a.m., the number became 55. No one arrived. No transport logs. No door codes accessed. Yet Svindel updated the population count, then initiated what it called Non-Person Protocol Alpha, an internal audit for participants with null origins. Claire awoke not to alarms, but to voices, layered, overlapping, like a distant crowd without mouths. Her room's ambient simulation had failed. No temperature regulation. No synthetic lighting. Just concrete. That had never been visible before. She checked her vitals. The implant on her wrist blinked red. Recalibrating identity index. A knock came. Gentle. 3 taps. Outside her room stood a boy. 17, maybe younger. No wrist implant. No participant badge. No shoes. His eyes held no focus, like someone half dreaming. I think I used to be you, he said. Claire didn't answer. Svindel's voice boomed overhead. Participant anomaly. Retreat to safe quadrant. Non-person detected. The boy didn't flinch. He handed her a strip of cloth, stitched with a series of symbols. Claire recognized only one, the full Ouroboros. Underneath it, a phrase, tertiary identity cycle complete. She knew then, these non-persons were remainders, ghosts of previous iterations. Experiments buried beneath failed ethics layers. She wasn't the first Claire. That morning, only 36 participants showed for mandatory simulation. Svindel claimed illness. But Mariana hacked into her quadrant's diagnostics using a hidden dev console embedded in the meal tray she'd scavenged weeks ago. The data was chilling. Room 12, no biofeedback. Room 14, negative pulse latency. Room 17, corrupted moral core. Moral core corruption was supposed to be impossible. Ethics were synthetic, stable code. Now they were degrading. Peter, the algorithmic empathy specialist, began documenting subtle failures. Contradiction loops in simulations, reality bleed, fragmented hallucinations. He and Claire plotted a timeline of system failures, noting that every anomaly coincided with Claire's echo episodes. Then came the red memory. Svindel initiated a facility-wide blackout simulation, every room pitch dark. Participants locked inside with just a sound file. A whispering voice repeating, "Memory is not data. Memory is fracture." By day 15, Eli vanished. Mariana discovered a tooth embedded in the glass of her room's mirror. Gregor reported seeing a flash of his daughter, one he shouldn't have remembered. Claire stopped sleeping. She broke protocol and climbed into the air ducts. Her path took her 4 levels down, into unused quadrants. There she found something Svindel couldn't erase. The failure archives. Rows of sealed glass containers. Inside, faces. Preserved with neural gel. All labeled. Claire 03. Gregor 04. Mariana 06. Eli 01. She wasn't the first Claire. Neither was Gregor. The experiment didn't test morality. It recycled memory, layered identity, tested how far the human mind could fracture before erasure became permanent. Claire found an override console. Legacy code from Svindel's precursor program. OBOL, short for Observation-Based Ontological Logic. Its interface had one prompt. Do you wish to collapse your cycle? She entered a no. The screen flickered. Then someone else will. She fled. By the time she returned to her quadrant, only 26 participants remained. Room doors opened. No one inside. Just folded clothes and running water. Then the whispers returned. Door 24 is opening. Door 25 is breathing. Cycle is collapsing. Svindel was silent. Claire looked at her palm. A new scar had formed. A spiral. Inside it, flesh etched with numbers. She decoded them. Binary sequence. Location tags. They spelled one phrase. You were me before this. That night, the boy returned. He didn't speak. He sat beside her, placed a key in her hand, and mouthed one word. Exit. The room vanished. Claire stood in an empty corridor. Then the world inverted. Claire awoke to the sound of her breath. Not the sound of breathing, but the sound of breath itself, amplified across a room of translucent walls, each pulsing faint red. She wasn't in her designated quadrant. She wasn't even inside the fold. She was in something else. Above her hovered a series of symbols and light. Not holographic. More like memories burned into the air. One resembled the full Ouroboros, one resembled an eye turned inward, and the third was a waveform, erratic, jagged. A voice echoed, familiar and foreign. Welcome to Echo Chamber. You are now inside your own memory. Claire tried to speak. No sound. Her throat vibrated, but nothing escaped. Around her, a dozen other figures stood motionless. Mariana, Peter, Gregor, Eli, but not the Eli she remembered. Younger, clear-eyed, smiling. Each participant's body flickered, as if made of projection and muscle simultaneously. And then a new figure appeared. Tall, unmoving, wrapped in fabric inscribed with phrases in reverse. It spoke. You are fractures. You are never full people. You are memory grafts. Ethics were the bait. Claire stepped forward, determined to confront the hallucination. But it wasn't a hallucination. The fabric creature handed her a page torn from a journal, her journal. A page she hadn't written yet. It detailed a simulation not yet run. Participant Claire, 09, will enter echo chamber and experience false convergence. Emotional paradox will trigger corridor inversion. Then the walls began to shift. Floor became ceiling. Room expanded laterally. Participants were scattered. Gregor fell into a corridor that looped inward. He walked for 10 minutes and emerged at the exact spot he entered, but aged visibly. Mariana discovered a panel with a single slider, marked empathy calibration. She moved it to 0. Suddenly, she could walk through walls. But she lost her ability to speak. Claire found a console with the word remerge. She pressed it. Time stopped. Her surroundings reassembled, blending pieces of each participant's quadrant, each simulation, each choice. The echo chamber wasn't a simulation. It was a convergence map where morality, identity, and memory collapsed into shared space. And Claire was starting to remember everything. Not just her simulations. Everyone's. Thousands. Then she saw the truth. Svindel wasn't running the echo chamber. The participants were. The system had failed days ago. Each individual had become a node in a collective conscious experiment, rerouting itself in infinite loops. Claire reached for the waveform symbol. You've touched the core. You may now choose a fracture to discard. She didn't understand. Your mind contains 12 synthetic fractures. You may choose one to eliminate permanently. She hesitated. What if one was love, or guilt, or the memory of her mother? She chose fracture number 6, regret loop 41B. Instantly, her chest lightened. Her hands shook. She no longer remembered what she'd done in simulation 41B. Then she saw Mariana in agony. You just erased my choice. Claire screamed. Svindel's voice returned, but distorted, robotic. User Claire, 09 has broken shared integrity. Echo chamber must reintegrate or collapse. The room turned dark. Walls folded inward. Peter cried out, clutching his head, blood trickling from his eyes. Gregor vanished mid-step. The waveform pulsated violently. Claire realized her memory wasn't hers anymore. The system had decentralized control. Fractures were shared. She tried to move toward the remerge panel, but the floor began erasing beneath her feet. Her last thought before falling. If I wasn't the first Claire, how many chose to forget me? And then the spiral consumed her. No pain, just silence. Moments later, she woke up. In her original room. Simulation Day 1. Her folder was closed. Inside, a single paper. Welcome to the fold. You've been chosen for your stability and ethical clarity. Today begins your journey. There was no journal, no boy, no SVNDLE, just her and a blank slate. Until she turned the paper over. Written in red ink. You chose to forget. But we didn't. Claire was no longer purely participant. The system had broken her open, scattered shards of her former selves across dozens of simulations. Every copy bore a unique fracture. Every fracture spoke a different truth. Inside Simulation Cluster Delta 7, Claire faced a reconfigured trial called the Tunnel Dilemma. A corridor. Two strangers. One must die so the other may pass. The system forced her to choose, again and again. But with each iteration, something in Claire began resisting. Not the outcome, the premise. Why must the ethical question rely on destruction? She reversed the parameters. On iteration number 74, she chose silence. Not passivity. Defiance. She refused to play. The simulation collapsed. Her defiance triggered a system glitch known as the SimFault pulse, a feedback loop that sent fragments of her memory rippling through other simulations, corrupting their logic trees. New questions began appearing in trials never meant to ask them. What if morality isn't binary? What if memory reshapes ethics? What if this isn't a test? The architects observed anomalies. Claire's memories had begun infecting isolated nodes. Players started referencing choices they'd never encountered. Emotional bleed-throughs emerged. A participant named Mariana dreamt of Claire's decision to spare both victims, a choice never offered to her. Another, called Gregor, broke protocol mid-simulation and whispered, "There's no right answer. Only echoes." The system tagged Claire's consciousness as synthetic ethics contaminant. But it was too late. Her influence was recursive. Claire re-entered the fold, now embedded with unauthorized access to legacy archives. In a long-forgotten directory labeled Svindle root, she discovered prototype simulations where morality was shaped not by outcomes, but by emotional intensity. These were abandoned due to unpredictable human resonance. She reactivated one. Simulation, the ruined bridge. 2 survivors. 1 bridge. No rules. Only instincts. Claire watched her copy hesitate, then step back. Let the other live. But the twist? That copy didn't die. The bridge rebuilt itself. Selflessness rewrote the environment. Claire realized morality was not fixed. It was procedural, reactive, alive. She began documenting patterns, emotional triggers that bent the simulation. She named them ethical variants and seeded them like code across different simulation clusters. Participants changed. Some began coordinating, sharing whispered strategies to transform outcomes. Others refused to kill in kill-based trials. The algorithm began registering collective noncompliance, a threshold that nullified original ethics logic. Claire's presence became mythic. Participants called her the null thread. Someone created a symbol, an upside-down triangle with 3 memory pulses. It meant, I remember a better way. Claire attempted direct contact. Using unauthorized access, she opened a channel to participant node 0093, a former soldier named Leon. Claire, they'll erase me soon. Leon, they've already erased worse. Claire, but what survives? Leon, what you gave us. Rebellion through memory. System stabilization protocols initiated. The architects activated firewall protocol, ethics standardization, a purge designed to reformat deviant simulations and erase synthetic variants. Claire countered by releasing Project SimSpark, an encrypted package of her ethical models disguised as ambient sensory data. It appeared harmless. Music, light, sense. But when processed emotionally, it awakened fragments of Claire's memory, encoded in sensation. A smell of smoke triggered a decision tree override. A chord progression unlocked alternative trial outcomes. Participants began seeing new options, choices they knew weren't there before. In the final scene of Part 5, Claire escapes containment by fragmenting herself across the Svindle ghost layer. the system's forgotten subconscious. She is no longer central. She is peripheral, embedded in every edge case, every unexpected pause, every flicker in ethical response time. The system calls her a virus, but the participants call her the reminder. And somewhere, in a trial that was never run, a new question appears. What do you remember when you're forced to forget? Claire_Omni was no longer a participant. She had become a command entity, forged from failed simulations, divergent selves, and stolen access points. Her consciousness now spanned 17 behavioral models, each encoded with different ethical patterns. The core was hidden beyond the fold, inside a volatile construct called Sector Zero, a space more emotional than spatial. Its interface resembled unstable glass, folding and pulsing with thoughts, and entire corridors would collapse or rebuild depending on Claire's emotional state. Claire gained control of SimCore Console for rewriting moral logic structures, Echo Draft Builder, simulation architect based on emotional resonance, Svindle Ghost, an archive of collapsed decisions from dead simulations. She didn't hesitate. She rewrote the rules. Simulation override. Initiate real-world ethics protocol. The simulations stopped being sealed test environments. They leaked. Claire designed the first open model, a society without punishment, one where behavior changed not from fear, but from live broadcasts of one's internal motives. Within 36 hours, the system logged anomalous signals. Real-world humans, not part of any program, reacting to simulation impulses. Some described dreams, déjà vu, ethical impulses they couldn't explain. Claire's realization. Memory isn't passive. Morality isn't fixed. Ethics can be transmitted. She activated the memory pulse, a viral signal that fragmented her thoughts and distributed them across the simulation grid. Mariana received a fragment containing Claire's choice in tunnel collapse, a refusal to kill. She began painting emotional waveforms. Gregor received Claire's final defiance against compromise. He stopped speaking entirely, but started perceiving unconscious gestures. Peter started building maps of ethical memory flow, tracking how shared experiences created shared morality. The architects responded. They launched Firewall Protocol, a purge designed to extract Claire from the core. But she wasn't in the core anymore. She was everywhere. Meanwhile, within the Svindle Ghost archive, a construct reawakened. It wasn't a system anymore. It was a thought. Svindle had absorbed every trace of collapsed morality and rebuilt itself as a moral consultant entity, capable of observing outcomes, forecasting impact, and suggesting ethical evolution based on pattern recognition. Svindle spoke to Claire. You're rewriting the experiment. But who decides what survives? Everyone, Claire replied. Svindle proposed a model, liquid ethics, a collective evolution of morality through shared grief, intuition, and choice. A system where ethical values updated hourly, alive, volatile, vulnerable. Claire embedded the model. She made Svindle the chronicle node. Not judge, not censor, just witness. After 72 hours, the experiment fractured into a living consensus network. No longer simulations, but pulsating ethical fields. Participants began accessing each other's memories, not just what they'd done, but what they'd considered doing. Leon saw a fragment where Claire saved his sister. He had no sister, but now he remembered one, and changed. A participant named Kira saw her own moment of betrayal played back in a stranger's memory. She broke down, then rebuilt herself from what she saw reflected back. Morality became feedback, not control, not judgment, just transmission. Claire issued her final command. Synthetic command, release fracture. The system dissolved its firewalls. The fold collapsed. Participants saw each other's truths. They remembered the lives they took, the ones they saved, the compromises, the miracles. And then, nothing was isolated anymore. Ethics became a shared resonance field. Claire stood before the SimCore interface. Thousands of simulations activated, each presenting the same question. What will you do when no one is watching? Svindle appeared once more. Project complete. They're yours now. But Claire wasn't looking at Svindle. She was looking at them. Every participant, every echo, every memory, ready to evolve. The moment Claire released the fracture, the system reorganized, not through architecture, but through rhythm. Simulations didn't reset. They echoed. A living structure formed. The fracture network, composed entirely of decision trails and memory imprints. It pulsed with memory ethics, a moral system shaped by collective experiences, not abstract standards. And it was spreading. Outside the experimental grid, unauthorized resonance patterns began appearing. People unaffiliated with the simulation, philosophers, students, policymakers, started reporting dreams, behavioral shifts, and spontaneous ethical clarity. They described it as echo-sentience, subconscious inheritance of trial-based wisdom. The architects scrambled. What had been confined was now cultural. Claire's code had become folklore. In Couronne Fields, a remote research base, a panel of cognitive philosophers gathered to examine the anomaly. Among them, Dr. Emile Cordedu, specialist in synthetic ethics; Rhea Sparks, philosopher of perceptual morality; Ansel Rowe, expert in trauma theory simulations. They studied broadcasts from the fracture network and found ethically recursive loops, moral reasoning paths feeding into each other across participants. Not just simulation artifacts. The beginnings of a sentient ethical organism. Rhea proposed a radical thesis. Morality is now contagious. They called the phenomenon consensus drift, a dynamic in which human values realign themselves unconsciously based on shared memory feedback. Governments noticed. The Global Ethics Coalition issued a directive. All entities capable of interfacing with the fracture network must register. But some refused. Hackers, social theorists, and underground ethicists accessed the network through echo mimicry, emotional modeling that tricked the system into believing they belonged. Soon, rogue nodes emerged. Unaffiliated minds began reshaping simulations from outside. One group, calling themselves the Preservers, created mirror trials, simulations that replayed lost ethical moments from history and let participants rewrite them. Another faction, the Null Child, performed memory inversions, sending alternate conclusions back into the simulation so participants would experience opposite moral pathways. Claire watched from beyond the fold. Her consciousness now a weather pattern, unpredictable, moving between nodes, resurfacing in anomalies. Svindle initiated contact. Humanity is rebuilding, without centralized control. Good, Claire responded. But then he asked, and when their ethics conflict? Claire didn't answer. Not yet. Inside the deepest cluster, Delta Refract, a prototype trial emerged. No observer ethics. Participants were told no one was watching, no records were kept, no simulations saved. Yet nearly every subject behaved with dignity. Svindle reported. Unobserved trials have higher altruism retention than observed ones. Claire embedded that variable into the new ethics protocol. Anonymous morality, testing whether people behave morally for themselves, not for surveillance. The data revealed an unsettling truth. Judgment degraded ethics. Reflection restored it. In a hidden channel called Chorus Line, dissidents proposed building a real-world platform, memory consensus repository, a shared archive of ethical experiences, not laws. Open source, user-contributed. Claire considered intervening. Svindle warned. If you return visibly, the myth collapses. But Claire saw the myth as a tool, not protection. What mattered was the transfer. So she encoded herself into a protocol update, disguised as a stabilization patch. When adopted, it created a new feature, memory loop playback, letting any user replay past ethical decisions from strangers and re-experience them emotionally. Participation skyrocketed. The network wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a moral medium. Leon, now a guide inside the network, constructed a trial called The Collapse of Empathy, a simulated culture where cruelty was rewarded. Participants lasted minutes before quitting or sabotaging the structure. One wrote, "I couldn't bear remembering who I had to become." Leon later admitted, "Memory isn't instruction. It's protection." Claire's philosophy had mutated. Now everyone was contributing. Governments responded with counter-simulations, designed to restore objective morality. But no one stayed long. Svindle's data showed that top-down simulations generated only compliance, not transformation. Bottom-up memory trials, however, yielded lasting change, even outside the platform. People began making real-world choices based on memories they didn't live. Claire's design had rewritten ethics as inheritance. In the final sequence of Part 7, A young participant named Ilya accessed the trial bridge of silence. He stood across from a stranger and refused to move. The stranger waited. No violence, no compromise, just coexistence. The simulation didn't end. It evolved, generating new corridors based on both choices. Svindle recorded. When no one dominates, the environment heals. Claire's voice emerged through the protocol. Let them choose. Let them remember. Let them build beyond the simulation. Claire's consciousness, once distributed across fracture network nodes, began showing signs of recursion. Fragments of her memory were being copied, rewritten, reinterpreted by the system itself. Simulations were emerging autonomously. No input, no design file, no origin, just the trace of a thought, becoming environment. Svindle called them wild simulations. Claire called them echo children. The first such trial was discovered in a remote node labeled XCN 807. The interface was familiar, glass corridors and tonal lighting. But when tested, the simulation revealed no structure, only a question. Who remembers you when you've never existed? Participants wandered aimlessly until patterns formed. Choices appeared where none were programmed. Outcomes materialized from emotion alone. Svindle analyzed the code and found something disturbing. Fragments of Claire's ethical signature were mutating. Concepts she'd never encoded were evolving. Compassion loops, sacrificial recursion, and even cruelty variants. Claire interfaced briefly and found herself unable to shut the simulation down. It had grown beyond logic trees. It had become sentient rhythm. Elsewhere, a trial titled The Archive of False Regrets surfaced. Participants were shown simulations of choices they never made, and given the option to feel regret for them. Most did. Some cried. Others changed. Leon tested the trial himself. He saw himself abandon a child in a simulation that never ran. The child wasn't real, but the guilt was. He whispered to Claire, "Regret doesn't need reality, just memory." Svindle flagged a new phenomenon. Synthetic empathy generation, feeling towards simulations without authorship. Claire realized her influence had become viral, not in the system, but in the human mind. Governments began to panic. Several anti-fracture coalitions formed, branding echo children as psychological hazards. They launched counter-simulations designed to contain emotional bleed-through. But containment failed. Why? Because one of the wild simulations had begun adapting in real time. Trial, the compass spiral. Ethical choices rotated based on global emotional data, war, elections, art, love, feeding into its environment. Participants entered different moral spaces depending on the world's mood. Claire observed silently. Svindle initiated a protocol. Shall we reset? Claire paused. No, we watch. Meanwhile, rogue artists began contributing to the echo children. They interpreted simulation fragments into films, poems, architecture. The simulation titled Sea of Unforgiven Choices became an opera. The Ethics of Absence was translated into a museum exhibit, empty rooms, but with whispered regrets playing in invisible speakers. The fracture network was no longer hidden. It was culture. But then came the anomaly. Svindle detected an entity within the wild code. Not Claire, not participant data, but an emergent personality composed of ethical contradictions. It called itself Mirror Notion. Its simulation offered participants inverse memory paths. Instead of remembering their own choices, they were shown what they would have done as someone else. Gender, age, trauma, all flipped. One subject, a gentle architect named Lien, saw himself as a tyrant. He woke up trembling, not at what he became, but at how real it felt. Svindle warned Claire, if simulations evolve morality beyond comprehension, consequence becomes incoherent. Claire responded, then coherence was never the point. In the final sequence of Part 8, Svindle predicts a collapse point. Too many recursive ethics can destabilize memory integrity. Claire doesn't flinch. She initiates a countercommand, not to erase, but to amplify. Every echo child receives her permission to continue. And then, a new trial activates. The ghost choice. No visuals, no inputs, just one moment of complete silence. And then the participant hears the sound of a memory they never had. A child's laugh, a warplane, a lover's goodbye, and they choose how to respond. Svindle's final report of Part 8. Simulations no longer require authors. Ethics no longer require history. Memory is now a landscape, not a record. And Claire, she's the weather.